Well, I am Carolyn Wieland and I am with Reuse Minnesota. And here this morning, we have Whitney Harvey, who is the Minnesota Chamber Senior Director of Workforce Diversity and Inclusion. So Whitney is kicking off our third session of our speaker series. And I'm going to turn it over to Whitney because I know she's got a lot of great information planned for you today. And we do at the end, we will have a small breakout session plan. So just wanted to give people a heads up. We will be breaking you out into small groups. So whether camera's on or off, it's up to you, but just wanted to give you a heads up. So Whitney, I'm going to let you take it away.
Sounds lovely. Thank you so much. I'm going to pull up my presentation, and can someone just confirm that we can see it? Okay, I see a thumbs up. Lovely.
Yep. Good.
Wonderful. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for having me here today. As mentioned, my name is Whitney Harvey, and I'm the Senior Director of Workforce Diversity and Inclusion at the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, the Minnesota Chamber Foundation. So I have been in my role for about a year and a half, and my goal, I'll go into it in a little bit more detail, but my goal is really to help the Minnesota business community in advancing their diversity, equity, and inclusion work, building inclusive workplaces that welcome the rich diversity that exists in our state. So before we begin, I just want to go through a little background about me, who I am, why I'm in this space. So I am a wife and a mother. I married my college sweetheart. We met at Gustavus, and we have two lovely daughters, celebrating soon to be 15 years of marriage. I should know this, so I'm sad that this is recorded. Just don't tell my husband. I have done the majority of my work in the healthcare field. So I worked in a variety of different roles in healthcare compliance, government programs, things like that. And I kind of just accidentally slid into the DEI space.
John is leaving because
okay,
I have to go through him to make orders, like when I need stuff.
Hey, can I make sure everybody's muted?
Yeah.
Okay, we're good.
We're good. Okay, sorry about that. So the majority of my professional career has been in the healthcare space. And I just kind of slid into DEI work. I started with a previous organization, joining just a D&I council internally and being responsible for kind of laying the foundation, the governance, the structure, the planning, the strategy, the rollout. And I was doing all of that work kind of off the side of my desk and realized this is filling my cup in a way I haven't been filled before. And so decided to make an official switch in 2020, I think it was, and have been with the chamber for about a year and a half. And I'm super excited about this. I mean, this is my passion work. I love it. I love the opportunity to speak with individuals who are either starting or beginning or continuing their journey and making progress. And I would say I'm, an advocate, an ally, and a champion in this space, and always willing and able to learn and grow. In terms of the why, and I feel like this is really important, and I always ask people who work in this space too, kind of what their why is or what their connection is to this work. And I think for me, it's really, there's a need, right? And I'll speak about it in a little bit more detail here in the presentation, but there's a need for our business community to get on board with this work. And I think we need support out there. And so that's really what we're trying to provide. I think cultural transformation is important. It's becoming kind of the necessary or the recommendation, especially for some of our younger generations that are entering the workforce. The community engagement component of it. We live in a state with some really, really wonderful nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations. And so the ability to kind of make the connections to all of them, I think, is very important too. That's the beauty of this work is there's really not competition. We're all working together to try and, make this state inclusive and a better place to live for everybody. And then most importantly, right, I have, as I mentioned, two little daughters that the future of our world, and I want to create a space that is inclusive and welcoming, and teach them that they can do whatever they want to do. So I see some, I just want to make this clear too. So if people have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll do my best to kind of monitor. But we will have time at the end of the presentation to discuss in a little bit further detail. So I want to start by just talking about the Chamber's initiative. And I think this is important because we are one of the first and only state chambers engaging in this work in the way that we're doing it. And we're taking a very intentional approach to the way that the information is being presented. As the chamber, we're obviously the voice of the Minnesota business community. And I think we have a very trusted partnership with the business community and have successfully been able to roll out initiatives and programs to help support the advancement. And this work is going to contribute to the future of our economy. So our goal is really to provide kind of a simplified and attainable approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we do that kind of in a number of ways, but ultimately, we are here to support the business community. Our job is not necessarily to tell people where they need to be, but really identify the opportunities and give them resources, tools, and the information to meet their goals. So I want to talk about when I first started at the chamber, and I think this is important information because there is no shortage of resources or information in this space, right? I can hop online, I can Google DEI and just be like slapped in the face with hundreds and hundreds of resources and information. And I think what we wanted to do as a chamber was to ensure that one, we weren't duplicating efforts, and two, that we weren't providing an unnecessary need to the business community. So first and foremost, we went out and we did focus groups in a variety of different areas in Minnesota. And again, because we serve the entire state of Minnesota, it's very important to get the perspectives of different communities. And our goal was to gather qualitative information to determine, what's the perception of DEI right now from the business and community, understand where we're at as a state, right? In order to measure our progress, we need to know where we're at in this particular moment, to identify the barriers, what's preventing you from engaging in this work. And ultimately kind of just define our lane and really identify what our opportunity as the chamber is. And the focus groups were amazing. We had some really wonderful discussions. I think from that, we were able to determine what our opportunities are and what our priorities are and how we fit into this like complex web of other DEI practitioners and professionals. So first and foremost, we wanted to create a space for resources and information. And again, because there are so many resources out there, I think it's challenging and overwhelming to navigate. And so we developed kind of a one-stop shop repository of resources that's available on our website with DEI information. And it goes, I'll talk a little bit more about kind of the structure and the format of that. But it's really intended to provide kind of a simplified and step-by-step approach. Connect, that's another big one. As I mentioned, there's so much value in the community-based organizations that exist in our state, and so many are focused on underrepresented demographics or helping to eliminate barriers. And I've got some great stories that I'll share later on as well, but serving as a connection point from business communities, whether it's connecting to other businesses who are doing this work and doing it well, or community-based organizations, again, that can help eliminate or remove some of those barriers. And then support the advancement. So through kind of the one-on-one guidance and consultation, whether it's training, whether it's education, whether it's, sitting down and having a conversation and reviewing a business's DEI strategy, there's an opportunity for us to provide kind of guidance and support. And then last but certainly not least, I think ensuring that we're focusing on all dimensions of diversity. And I'm just going to pop to this slide too, because I love this dimensions of diversity wheel, and I always use this when I talk about it. One of the findings that I received when we did the the focus groups was that a lot of people associate the term diversity with race. And I think obviously that's incredibly important. And I think those targeted initiatives are necessary. But there are so many other underrepresented, underserved communities. And I think we wanted to ensure that we were bringing visibility to them. So this diversity dimensions kind of graph, I think, is very powerful. You've got kind of the big six, the internal dimensions that I think, most organizations prioritize and focus on, but we wanted to expand. So focusing on people with disabilities, people, military affiliated employees, whether it's veterans, service members, military spouses, and then formerly incarcerated, second chance workers, right? So these are all, we're taking this approach from a workforce perspective and looking at the potential of our workforce. And so using that broad definition, and again, this kind of ties into the defining the terminology, we want to provide that kind of customized and tailored approach to businesses. So I'll use the example of, I went out to a business in Brainerd, Minnesota. I pulled the demographics of the region. They're 99% white or something along those lines. So racial diversity in like a recruiting or hiring strategy is probably not going to be a priority of theirs. And so, looking at the other demographics, they've got a higher population of veterans and service members. They've got a higher, population of people with disabilities. So that's where I would recommend that business start. And so that's just an example of how to kind of tailor the approach to what makes sense for the business, because there are so many different factors that contribute to the success or what's possible. So going into kind of, deeper definitions, and I don't want to be like that person that just reads off of the slides, but, from an equity perspective, I think equity can come in a variety of different forms. And I think we hear it in different ways. For us, it's really kind of encouraging businesses to identify the personalized kind of needs of the employees, right? So understanding that all individuals don't necessarily need the same things in order to succeed. So taking into consideration those individual needs and accommodating those to ensure that everybody can be successful in the workplace. And then inclusion is really just, kind of the byproduct of all of this, right? I mean, inclusion is the creation of this environment where people are treated fairly and they feel like they're welcome and they're respected for being kind of authentically themselves. So these terms I think are really important, and I always encourage businesses to really define these before they launch any official initiatives, because people will ask and people will make assumptions. And again, that association with diversity as race, I think can be intimidating to some people at times. So our approach to diversity, equity, inclusion, and then the information we have on the website and the information that we use to kind of support our businesses is really broken into this kind of what, the why, the how. And so that's how I've tailored my presentation today. Why is this important? What's the business case for DEI? And then the how is like, how can I execute this? How can I make this happen within my organization? So the why, I think the why, and I'll go into a little bit more details too, but I think the why is because there's a need, right? The Minnesota business community plays a very significant role. We have untapped talent in our workforce right now, and individuals who are kind of on the economic sidelines that we should be engaging, right? Our state demographics are not necessarily in our favor right now. We're losing Minnesotans. We've got a historically low unemployment rate. It's a very tight labor market. So businesses are having to get more creative and kind of look outside of their traditional talent pools. Increased innovation, right? There's a benefit, and I'll go into this in more detail too, but new perspectives, new viewpoints, new thoughts, ideas, that all drives innovation in the workplace. It's becoming a non-negotiable, right? I think I mentioned this or touched on it a little bit earlier. But our younger generations are looking for this in employers. They are looking for businesses who not only provide them with career development opportunities, but support them, right? And are aligned with kind of their viewpoints, individuals or businesses who give back to the community. Those are becoming competitive advantages. And then in business partnerships too, I mean, I can tell you, formerly coming from corporate America, the RFP process, people are asking, what are you doing in this space? And how are you ensuring that you're making progress and making this a priority? And then in addition, there's business incentives. I think there's a desire to, I know there's like funding available for DEI training, and I think those incentives are really encouraging our businesses as well. So when I talk about kind of the imperatives, and again, the business case, I think is really important to this work, because this is a hard thing to measure. It's hard to determine, are we making progress? Are we doing well in this space? So the why, we have to have a compelling why. And I think the role of the leader in the implementation is so important. So I always start with this, right? There's kind of these three imperatives. There's the moral imperative, the business imperative, and the economic imperative. The moral imperative, which is kind of like the warm fuzzy, right? Like, we're doing this work because it's necessary. We're doing this work because it's the right thing to do. But that's not necessarily what drives our business leaders, right? And while I would like that to be a component of it, I say just, if it takes something else to start the journey, I'd love to see you there. So the business imperative for this work, I mean, businesses, and as I mentioned previously, businesses who have DEI strategies, and there is data and research to back this up, are more innovative, have higher employee retention rates, high employee morale, which makes sense. If I show up to an organization where I feel respected, valued, my accommodations are taken into consideration, I'm going to like it a lot better there, and I'm going to stay a lot longer. And then, the big one is higher financial performance again. And I think that's just a byproduct of being present, wanting to be there. You're likely to work a little bit harder. And then the economic imperative, and with our Chamber Foundation, we do a lot of economic research. And so these two graphs here are from our Minnesota 2030 report, which is really focused on a snapshot of our economy and recommendations for continuing to make progress on our growing economy. And I mean, there's two things here. One is our demographics are changing in our state. And again, we're talking specifically on race here, but our demographics are changing. We're losing a lot of Minnesotans. Our populations of color are growing kind of exponentially larger than our white populations. There's increased labor force participation in communities of color. And you can see here, even counties with greater ethnic and racial diversity are growing faster, right? So our demographics of our state are changing. So there is this economic imperative. Businesses are going to need to start looking in non-traditional kind of talent pools for candidates. So the how, I think, is probably, the most important part of this. How do I make this happen? And I will say, at the conclusion of those focus groups, there were some things that were very unanimous. The first one being almost everybody there knew that they could and should be doing more. I think the business community understands the role that they play in advancing or prioritizing workplace inclusion. But there's a lack of understanding how, right? Where do I start? That was the biggest question I received. And I think because there are so many opportunities and so many different places to look through that DEI lens, I think it became a little overwhelming. And so I've got a resource, and I'll link it at the end of the presentation here. But our DEI playbook, I think these are some fundamental steps that I like to tell business leaders that they need to think about before they even start, taking the pen to paper. So laying the foundation, what's your mission? What's your vision? What's your, potential outcome? Why are you doing this work? And what is the message that you're going to relay to your employees, to your staff, to your leaders? What's your North Star, right? And that is so important because as you're, making progress, making changes, rolling out education, launching initiatives, you need to be able to kind of anchor back to that. This is how this is connected to our mission as an organization. And this is what we hope to accomplish. This is why, right? And I think DEI work is cultural work. It's internal culture, it's transformation, it's kind of pushing people outside of their comfort zones. It's doing things a different way than they've been done before. And so having that compelling why, having a mission, having a clearly defined definition of what this means to your organization is so incredibly important. Gathering key stakeholders, and this is, I think, a step that can often get missed. This work cannot be accomplished by a group of 3 people, in entry-level positions. I think we need to ensure that we have one executive level support. We have to have, support and leadership setting those expectations at the top, because employees are going to look to their leaders, right? And so you have to make the determination of who do you want to represent this work? And my recommendation is always to have kind of a cross-functional group of individuals in varying levels within the organization, because they're all going to have different perspectives, thoughts, ideas, and experiences in the workplace. Conducting an internal assessment, and this is something that we offer at the Chamber. We launched a pilot this year, and the goal is really to give businesses kind of a snapshot of where they're at in their journey. And I mentioned this previously, but this is hard to measure progress in, right? Because you're measuring culture, you're measuring feelings, you're measuring experience. And so you can do that through kind of surveying and things like that. The diversity part is easy because you can measure demographics. There's information, there's ways to capture that. But in order to really ensure that you're making progress in this space, you have to know where you're at currently and know what your opportunities for improvement are. So those are kind of like the 3 fundamental steps that need to happen before you even begin this work. And then I think from there, the assessment can help identify what your opportunities are, and you can build your strategy, you can implement, you can roll things out, prioritize things. And then I always say, hold yourself accountable, right? Because you will make mistakes. You will potentially not meet your goals. You may have some setbacks. I think of, in 2020, we had this like racial awakening after the murder of George Floyd. And a lot of businesses were like, this is a priority for us now. We care about this. And then this little thing called COVID-19 hit, right? And priorities changed for the business community. There were additional challenges, and maybe some of these initiatives got put on hold or on pause. And so being able to be a little graceful and understand that, like, hold yourselves accountable, but it's never too late. It's never too, you never have missed the mark. So I'm seeing a lot of businesses who are kind of like reinitiating, this work at the kind of conclusion or the tail end of the pandemic. And I always say, it's never too late. So our business best practice categories, and I'll go into these in a little bit more detail here, but these are really kind of the 5 chamber areas that we see as opportunities to look through that DEI lens in terms of like best practices within an organization. And some of these are internal, some of them are external. Planning and strategy, I already talked a little bit about that. That's going to be like after you, provide those fundamental steps and identify where you're at in the journey, kind of reviewing all of these best practice opportunities. And again, you don't have to do all of these at the same time, right? And I think that's what's overwhelming to people is like, I can't launch 5 initiatives, and then taking into consideration the multiple dimensions of diversity, right? So if I can't do a targeted initiative towards BIPOC employees or towards, the LGBTQ community, or launch some disability inclusion, initiatives, and that can feel overwhelming. So I always say, like, these are all of your options. This is a buffet of offerings. You don't have to do everything at once. But recruitment and retention, I would say this is what, most businesses are looking for right now is how can we, implement better recruiting strategies so we can engage a more diverse candidate pool, which I always recommend should be evaluated and assessed. So if businesses are not asking those questions, and I realize there are some that just don't have that capability, but being able to make a difference in your employee demographics goes back to those candidate pools. So are you, posting equitable job postings? Are you using inclusive language? Are you, even in the interview process, are you, eliminating bias? Are your recruiters, are your interview panelists, familiar with the potential of bias in a workplace, right? I graduated from Gustavus. If I see somebody with a gusty degree, I might get excited and I might show favoritism. That's bias too, right? Identify and recruit, diverse candidate pools. Where are you posting? How are you posting? I use the example of, my friend Ken, who is the president of the Wilmer Area Lakes Chamber of Commerce, and they have a pretty significant population of immigrants and refugees. And he said, we have businesses that post at, places of faith, churches, things like that, because a lot of these individuals that have come from immigrants and refugees are, pretty anchored in their faith. And so using that as an opportunity to post jobs, posting in a different language, those are all kind of innovative and unique opportunities. And then, ensuring that you're looking at your onboarding process too, right? Our employees going to feel that sense of like culture, what you're trying to convey through your mission in that first week, month, 90 days. Community engagement is another big one. And again, this I think is at the demand of our employees, right? Like who are we connecting with from a community partner perspective? And I have another example of a great business that we partnered with here in Minnesota. And they had what they called kind of a nonprofit open house. So they, invited all the local nonprofits out to their business. They sat them down, they did a little presentation, said, this is our business model. These are our challenges. How can you help? Who can help? And so from that, and this particular organization hires a lot of immigrants and refugees. And so for them, transportation was a barrier, language was a barrier. And so, they developed partnerships with nonprofits, one to help with transportation. So they've got like a busing service for their employees. They have on-site English learning lessons through another community partner. They also have driver's license training and education. So businesses, I think, are getting more creative, and it not even just from like a philanthropic perspective, right? Who are you supporting in the community? Who are you giving money and funding to? But also, who are you partnering with, right? I think there's this immense opportunity for greater partnerships with some of our community-based organizations. And so I always encourage businesses to look there if they haven't. Supplier diversity or procurement, I think this is an area where we have some pretty immense opportunity. And, part of it could be, again, after the pandemic, all the challenges with our supply chain and the delays. I think right now businesses are really saying like, I just need my stuff. I need it on time. I need it efficiently. I need a valuable partner. But there is an opportunity, right? Are you acknowledging MBE or minority business enterprise certifications? Are you tracking the number of disability-owned businesses that you're partnering with, or veteran-owned businesses you're partnering with? Do you have vendor requirements? Are you asking questions about their, DEI initiatives? Are you, partnering with an organization that has a very firm standpoint that does not align with your mission? So set goals and understand what's realistic and what's possible. Workplace programming, and I would say this is really growing in popularity, and I have been so impressed with the number of businesses who have, implemented internal programs, whether it's internships or apprenticeships. You can do registered apprenticeships through the state or build your own kind of apprenticeship program, mentorships. I think, inclusive on and offboarding, which I talked about a little bit too. You know, do you have volunteer time off? What are you doing internally to support employees? You know, are you asking employees if they have any accommodations? Are you able to satisfy those accommodations? And so encouraging businesses to look internally at their policies, at their procedures, look for opportunities to kind of reduce some of those barriers and anything that could deter somebody from working at your organization. Training and education, I would say this is a space where a lot of businesses choose to start their DEI work. And I think, you know, any training, any education, I think can be good, but I do think there is a wrong and a right way to do this. And I think being very intentional about where you're at as an organization and what makes sense. I've heard so many stories about businesses who go kind of too far on the spectrum and lose, you know, a significant portion of their employees. I would say this chamber initiative, we have a very gentle approach to DEI, and that's very intentional, right? My job is never to judge or tell a business where they need to be. There are community-based organizations out there who will say, if you're not doing this, this, and this, that's not good enough. That's not really our model. Our model is to say, you know, wherever you are, wherever you're starting, whenever you're starting, that's okay. We're here to support you. And understanding that, you know, the small to mid-sized businesses, especially those in greater Minnesota, who don't have access to all the resources or the coalitions or cohorts, right? They need support too. And so that's our primary goal. So the training and education, I think, you know, there's so many routes you can go. I think a lot of businesses, you know, make the decision to hire an external consultant, but there's so many other ways to, you know, train or educate your staff, whether it's highlighting the stories of internal employees or, you know, creating a space to engage in conversations, right? Even having like an internal counsel or a group that can provide feedback, insight, that is willing to kind of create a safe space for open dialogue can really be a training and education opportunity. And those have been some of the ones that I think have been best received, are just get a group of people together, have a topic, and let's just talk about it. And then there's, you know, is it mandatory? Is it recommended? Is it all leaders? Is it all staff? There's so many options in terms of how to roll out an effective training strategy, and that looks different for every business. So taking that into consideration as well. In terms of like individual opportunity, right? So there's diversity, equity, inclusion work is unique because everybody is also on their own personal journey, right? I'm at a different place than you're at, than my, you know, CEO is at, and that has a lot to do with our experiences. But I think in addition to that kind of business responsibility, we also have individual responsibilities or opportunities as well. So a lot of people say, what can I do in the workplace? How can I help? How can I make a change? And I would say, you know, these things here, make diversity visible, which means bringing new people to the table. You know, I think of this work, and again, I think it can be intimidating to some because it's not like stealing the mic from somebody else. It's like offering somebody a seat at the table and asking their thoughts and opinions. So I take that very literally, right? Like, start asking your employees. So many people say, I wonder how I'm doing, or I don't know how I'm doing. And I'm like, well, you probably need to ask people, right? I mean, that's the way you know if you're meeting the needs of your employees or your colleagues, is ask. Bring new people to the table and say, how can I better support you? How can I better support or help to eliminate any barriers, right? Engage in those conversations, which at times I think can be a little challenging. But building meaningful relationships is so important, right? And again, it goes back to this kind of shifting mindset where, you know, going to work, clocking in, clocking out, like business is not really transactional anymore. Employees are looking for more, further support. They want career development. They want connection in this kind of like disconnected virtual world that we're transitioning to. So building meaningful relationships, I think, can be really powerful. I had a friend in a previous organization, and again, you know, working in the DEI space, I wanted to educate employees. So I used the example of, you know, Ramadan. I tapped her and I said, can you just tell me about how this impacts your ability to show up to work? What are some parts and pieces that it would be beneficial for people to know? And, can I share this with the organization? And you wouldn't believe how many people are like, oh my gosh, they fast. They don't even drink coffee in the morning, and I'm like, if I didn't drink coffee, I would be a demon, right? So like, that's going to impact my ability to show up to work as myself. And so little things like that, making those connections and being able to kind of learn and grow from one another is so unbelievably important. Practice. So practice using inclusive language. Terminology is constantly shifting. And I will say I'm at that age now where it's like, I just don't know if I can keep changing, but I do, right? But that means that I will continue to make mistakes, and that's okay. But making an effort, I think, is all that people are looking for. Asking questions. And again, it goes back to kind of that story about tapping my friend about Ramadan, right? Ask questions. It's okay to be curious. I think so much of this misunderstanding or the fear or the stereotypes that we experience are because we just don't know. And then serve as an advocate and an ally, right? You don't have to know everything. You don't have to be, a hardcore champion, but you can be an ally to somebody. You can give them space to contribute to the conversation. You can gather their specific feedback. You don't have to walk around with like a badge of honor. Just practice the little things. And then document what you've done, what you're doing, right? I think the documentation piece is something that a lot of businesses struggle with because all of this work is so not necessarily disjointed, but as you saw in the best practice categories, it's taking place in so many different areas of the organization. And so it does get challenging when you're trying to measure your progress. If you've got a procurement team that's doing their own initiatives and you've got your HR team doing their hiring and recruiting initiatives, like try and find a way to consolidate all of those separate initiatives and efforts so you can really document what you've done and what you're doing. That big picture is so important. And then identify where you're at in your journey. And again, that goes both personally and professionally, right? The way that I show up personally is a little bit different than the way that I show up professionally. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I know that as an organization, I have certain expectations and I want to make sure that I'm satisfying those and being respectful of those. And so identifying where you're at in the journey, knowing where your organization is at the journey and being mindful of that, I think is really important. As I mentioned, our job is to meet businesses where they're at in their journey and not tell them where they need to be. And I think regardless of where you're at, if you're a big corporate organization that has an entire staff of people to do this work and all the monies to roll out initiatives, that is fine. But small to mid-sized businesses, that doesn't have to be what DEI looks like for them. So understanding like where you're at and what your opportunity as a business based on industry, business size, geography, like what's your region, what is the community that you're serving, all of those things play a role in what your initiatives will look like. So final thoughts, I always encourage people, and I usually start my presentations with this, just get comfortable being uncomfortable. This is a sensitive topic, right? This is, 50 years ago, we didn't go to work and talk about like our challenging experiences as, a mixed race woman. And so it can be uncomfortable. And I think there can be this guilt associated with either a lack of knowing or a lack of experience. Try and throw all of that out the window, right? And just be comfortable in that discomfort and know that that's where you're growing and that's where you're learning the most. The other thing is the journey is not linear. And again, I use the pandemic as an example of just one giant hurdle that impacted probably the entire business industry. There are things that are going to come up. There are going to be priorities. There are going to be missteps. There are going to be, hurdles or bumps in the road. But my advice is to not stop, right? So progress isn't exponential. It's not going to continue getting better and better. You'll have some hiccups and just expect that. And then the other thing is, give yourself grace. We all start somewhere. So if you have not yet started, if this is the first conversation you've heard or you viewed the first presentation on diversity, equity, and inclusion, you've never said those words, that's okay. Everybody starts somewhere. Like, my job is not to judge you, and this is always a safe space. So that is our approach to DEI. I want people to be comfortable regardless of where they're at on the journey. Okay, so that was so long of me just talking at everybody, and I just like slammed you all with a ton of information. I think right now what I would like us to do is just separate into breakout rooms, and maybe we do like 5 minutes and then we can come back and share an account for questions. But I'd like you to just, talk about, reflect on what you heard, what you learned here today. Share with the group. I'd like you to share something you learned and something you can commit to. So I'd like you to walk away today saying, this is what I'm going to do different. This is what I'm going to do better. And it can be short term. It can be long term, right? Whether it's, hey, I want to have a conversation with somebody internally. I want to serve as an internal champion. Or maybe it's, I want to get engaged, or I want to start tapping community-based organizations. It doesn't have to be a giant ask. I think just a commitment, but having an action item that you can hold yourself accountable to, I think is really important. So let's, Carolyn, you want to put everybody in the breakout rooms and we'll just reconvene, let's say at 9:50. And then if we have time to share, we can. Otherwise, I would say reflect and enjoy the time with one another.
Okay, yep.
So you're welcome to turn on your cameras if you want. I think we're kind of wrapped up here and done. I wanted to open it up and see if anybody had anything they wanted to share. Otherwise, let's move to questions. So I'll pause to see if anybody wanted to share, if you all had a good conversation.
Yes, we did. Actually, I think I took over to ask about when it comes to religion. We're very inclusive in the office, but then we have religion sometimes mixed together in volunteer groups. How to lay up the ground rules beforehand to say, we want all of you to work as people. I had really good ideas in my break room.
Yeah, religion is a tricky one, right? And I always encourage, there are some really great organizations out there that can help in establishing kind of the framework for religious diversity strategy. But it's essentially, ensuring that you're creating a safe space, because there are going to be religions that conflict or that maybe conflict with other things. I think when it comes to faith-based group and that especially the LGBTQ community, there can be some conflict there. And so as an organization, it's your responsibility to kind of set the expectations. You can have differing opinions, thoughts, ideas, but you have to be respectful and you have to find a way to collaborate with one another.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah. All right. So if nobody else wants to share, I'm just going to wrap it up here by sharing some of our resources. So as I mentioned, we've got a DEI resource center on our website that's available to everybody, not just chamber members. It breaks down kind of the what, the why, the how that we talked about, and utilizes or links to some other great resources. There's a link on there to a very compelling business case from Berkeley EDU, and it's a PowerPoint presentation that's intended to be presented to executive leaders to really show the why, and there's some data and information in it. So I always point people into that if they're looking to get executive buy-in. The playbook, which goes into a little bit more detail with laying those fundamentals, the establishment of the mission, the vision, the definitions, that's available on our website and available for download as well to all, not just chamber members. And then our DEI assessment process, which I talked about a little bit. We are prioritizing chamber members for that work, but it's an opportunity to get that kind of snapshot in time. It's available, it's free to members. You get kind of a score, a report with recommendations, contact information, a kind of customized resource list. So that is good too. But So reach out to me if you have anything. I think I'll open it up to see if anybody has questions. I know we have just a couple minutes left here. So yeah, anyone have a question?
I had a question. Well, I'll see if I can articulate it.
Sure.
In our breakout room, I kind of mentioned this. I've had an opportunity to interact with members of the business community, and there's some outright hostility towards DEI. We've seen this in courts with the striking down of affirmative action, this kind of idea that, DEI is somehow choosing people not on the merits of their ability, and that it is somehow kind of a prejudicial in itself. How do you break through that resistance? I mean, you've laid out a very compelling case, but I think you have to have somebody kind of predisposed to want to listen to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's a great question. And I think that's the biggest challenge in operating in a space, is that there will always be the resistors, right? I always say there's kind of this like 20, 60, 20% of people don't want to touch this work with a 10-foot pole. They don't want to engage a conversation. They're going to shut down when it's brought to their attention. Then there's 20% of the people who are going to say, you're not going far enough, you're not doing enough, that's not good enough, and who are going to kind of like, remove themselves because you're not where they are. I focus kind of on that 60% in the middle. Like I cannot change minds. I cannot change hearts. I can educate, I can provide data and information and give a compelling why. But the people who are resisting and the people don't understand, like I can't waste time and energy on those. So my focus is really on the people in the middle who are willing to engage in a conversation, right? And I feel like in terms of the gentleness of our approach to DEI, like it doesn't get much more safe, gentle, accommodating than what we're presenting. And so those are probably not my target audiences, unfortunately.
Well, and Steve brought up an interesting point that we didn't have too much time to explore, and I appreciate your response, Whitney, but it was really, I think it's interesting, like when people talk about, oh, you're hiring somebody and you're giving someone an advantage now, right? Because of their race. And so they may not be the most qualified. And I guess my response and the learning that I've done is, as we hire and add questions to the interviews and look more broadly, I guess, at what a person brings to the table, and just understanding, diversity, a person's background, and what that might offer that maybe you don't necessarily see on the surface. So, you're looking at, are they a scientist? Are they skilled in this? This is just another element. So it doesn't mean that because you're this or because you're that, we're hiring you. It's just one more thing. And if you're not consciously thinking about those things, you might not understand the advantages that brings to you or the opportunities that it provides. And so for me, it's just one more factor. And so I guess when people come back really strong about that, that's kind of where I go with it, is it's just one more factor to consider, and it's an important one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, very great points there. And thank you for sharing. I think, what I can do is help business leaders understand, because again, they're like, we want to hire more diverse people. And it's like, well, have you looked at your candidate pools? Have you looked at where you're posting jobs? Like, my recommendation is never to take somebody solely because they are diverse, or I think in this term, you're probably assuming racial diversity. That's never the intention. The intention is to ensure that that diverse candidate ends up in the interview process, right? And if you're not getting that, then what are you missing? What are you doing differently? Right. In terms of like the minimum qualifications and looking beyond to like transferable skills, that's another big one. And that goes beyond just kind of racial diversity as well. It's like, what can this person learn versus what skills do they already have? And I would say there's probably some pretty significant movement towards that on the job skills versus like skilled workers. And I can see the business community kind of like changing that mindset. It's no longer we're looking for skilled workers. It's we're looking for workers that we can teach the skills to, that we can develop and we can grow internally. So there is this kind of slight shift. And I think from a DEI perspective, that maybe doesn't feel like it's specifically tailored to underrepresented demographics, but it is, right? Education is, there is systemic issues in our education system, right? So So I think we're headed in the right direction and we're making progress, but there will always be people who are like, that's not fair, right? And I think we just have to, we can give them the compelling why, we can shoot them with data and information. But again, like, the job is not really to change everybody's mind.
I appreciate the thoughtful responses.
Yeah, you're welcome. Does anybody else have anything? I know we're at 10 o'clock here, so I want to be mindful of everybody's time and life and schedules. Is there anything else I can answer for you? Otherwise, I would, you know, I would welcome the opportunity to connect with you. I always say it's good to have a phone a friend just to like call upon or to ask questions. I'm happy to be any of your phone a friends. If you're interested in learning more about the DEI initiative or the project, or just want to have a chat with me, please reach out. I would really enjoy that. So thank you so much for your time and your energy and engagement today. It was an absolute pleasure to be here. So thank you, Carolyn.
Yes, thank you, Whitney, for joining us this morning. And we will be sending out the slides and the recording later this week. And we have one more session scheduled for this year on November 17th from 9 to 10 a.m. And that topic will be Indigenous Models of Sustainability. So something similar, but very different. And we will be joined by Michael Dockery, who is the assistant professor in the U of M's Department of Natural Resources. So our registration is available on our website for that. And we hope you can join the last of our speaker series. So thank you, everybody, for spending your Friday morning with us. We will be sending out notes shortly, and please reach out to Whitney with any questions or suggestions or ideas that you have. So thank you for joining us, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.